Hello, um, this is Aaron Calloway. I wanted to make the kind of video I wish I knew about around 2011 to 2016. Um, you see a lot of like feel good type of stories, especially now on YouTube, about urban planning and channels like City Beautiful kind of made urban planning a little bit more visible in the ether. Um, but I wanted to give some words to anybody who's currently in an undergrad, about to go into grad school, or looking for a job straight out of school in the planning field, in urban planning. Um, and if you watch this, I hope it helps. So, probably the most important things that I feel that don't really come across very well in a lot of planning programs is exactly what the different types of planning are and what their day-to-day lives are like and the realities of where you most likely will fall. So there are, I would say, three major categories of planning with some subsets. So the first, which is probably what most people think of as planning, is comprehensive planning, long range planning, where your job is you work with a team of people, or maybe it's just you, depending on the size of your municipality. You hold meetings with constituents, and you spend months to multiple years drafting different iterations of comprehensive or land use plans, which act as guideposts for zoning laws, and they're federally required in order for zoning ordinances to be valid. There's case law on that. I'm sure you'll read it in school. The second type is transportation planning. Uh, Probably have a good idea of what it is. You think you do. Really, it's trying to get grant money, pass through money from the federal level to state level down to your MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization. So you're doing everything you can to get this money, and then you write reports and you dish out that money to certain projects, corridor projects or whatever. So it's mostly about managing money. That's transportation planning. And then the last major category is current planning, or development planning. It is very much an oxymoron in the name of planning. There are different subsets of planning. I would say most of the subsets of planning fall within their comprehensive planning, such like community planning or neighborhood planning, where you're doing that long range, actually developing plans with the help of the constituents, but more on the small scale instead of, say, a metropolitan area or a county. Now, most people, when you're in school for planning, you want to be in comprehensive planning. You want to have some impact for long-term development, and in order to do that, you need to influence policy. Well, the realities of comprehensive planning. One, most of the time, those positions are rarely vacant. Those are the jobs that planners want, and they're really easy. They're really comfortable. Comprehensive planning jobs, you're talking about like what you're working on, the plans, the deliverable, the plan itself, in the different sections of the plan. They're so lax on the time frame, because you're talking about 6 months, a year, 2 years for a single plan, that the stress of that job is extremely low. You have so much free time. You actually get to do some planning, but really, you get to pull census data and all that stuff. But the major policies, at the end of the day, if a municipality has an in-house comprehensive planning unit, the policies are coming from the public more more often than not. And not only just the public. The big theme of planning in the United States is that in a municipality, typically money wins. So the people who might be on your comprehensive planning council, board, whatever your municipality wants to call it, most of the time those are more well-off individuals, well-connected individuals, people with money and interests, and their voices will be louder than the public. And you as the planner, you just collect all the voices and you put them on paper, and then you cover up stuff with statistics, and you give advisories for the future. Comprehensive planning, it's nothing in a comprehensive plan is hard rules. They are guideposts. So other planning divisions may not even follow the comprehensive plan most of the time, depending on the issue at hand. And the reality for comprehensive planning, because that's where most people want to be, most places don't have an in-house comprehensive planning division, because your comprehensive plan is good for 20 some odd years. And you're talking about having a division of people bankrolled in a department whenever their work is so sparse. So what a lot of places do is put out these things called RFPs, requests for proposals, to private firms. So instead of hiring people to do their comprehensive plan or make comprehensive plan amendments, they'll contract out to a private company for $1 million, $500,000, a couple $100,000 to take the 2 years. Their team makes the comprehensive plan, and usually, most of the time, the material is copy and paste. You work in enough places, you look at enough comprehensive plans, most of the material in it is the same wherever you go. Planning is a hive mind profession, very much is. Let's see. Yeah, so comprehensive planning, if that's where you want to be, good luck finding a municipality that has a division that has openings, because if they have a division, a comprehensive planning division, they're going to have very few openings because people want those positions, and they're not going to leave them in government, most likely, unless they get a better job somewhere else or their spouse moves. It is what it is. If you want to do that, you have better luck in the private sector. We'll get to that. Transportation planning. If you get in transportation planning, awesome. It is usually conducted at a much higher level. So there are different levels of government. Say you have your small town, your county, your state, federal government. And transportation planning, if a city has a transportation planning division, they're really not doing transportation planning on part of the city. They're doing it on part of what's called an MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization. MSAs, Metropolitan Statistical Areas, are mandated by the federal government to have an MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization, as the recipient of federal pass-through money for roads. And some states have laws on the books that prevent that pass-through money to be used for anything other than roads. So if you want to be a transportation planner and you want to try to affect pedestrian-friendly, multimodal transportation, and you see all those federal highway dollars, can't use those. You got to use transit money. But those jobs, great. Because they're at the MPO level, they're further away from the public, and therefore further away from your typical administrative duties. So you have a lot of report writing, a lot of grant writing. You get to participate in making the plans. And once again, because that's more of a plan-centric job, planners don't like to leave those positions as much. And so at the government level, it's not usually often that those positions stay open or that they become open. And the same deal with comprehensive planning. A lot of times governments will put out RFPs, requests for proposals, for transportation planning, contract firms, that kind of stuff. And then the final, which is probably what most people will fall into, you get a job out of college, out of grad school. You go into what's called current planning. And current planning is an oxymoron. You're not writing plans. You are administering the law. So typically the policy process goes like this. Upper management in a planning division or whatever, planning department, might have a gripe about something, about some line of ordinance in the law, and say that it allows for something that wasn't allowed in a prior place that they work, and their minds can't wrap around that. So they bitch and moan about it to the department head. Department head's like, oh yeah, that sounds good. Because usually, most likely, the department head is not involved in the day-to-day planning duties. They're too busy talking to the manager, the city manager, whatever, the city lawyer. So the level of removal means that he's got to rely on the upward bias of whatever management is in place. And so if the management is saying these things, most likely the department head will give a good ear, and the department head will funnel those concerns up to councilmen, elected politicians. And those politicians will do what they can once the department head and whoever else has drafted the ordinance, the change in ordinance. They'll pass it, and it goes into the ordinance, goes into the codes. At which point, the planner or planners beneath management, their job is to implement and administer the law, right? They themselves are not crafting the law. They themselves are not crafting any plans. Instead, you see, say, depending on how your city might chunk it up, a planner might have the responsibilities of reviewing permit site plans. So you take that site plan and you look at the lot area, the building footprint, and you look at the codes and make sure that jives, that ratio is good. You look at their setbacks from the different property lines, and you make sure those jive. And all you're doing is going through the ordinance of that section and checking off those boxes. And then at the end, you put your stamp on it, and it's good to go. Most of the time, as a planner in a current planning division, your responsibilities are twofold. You do zoning cases, so you have legislative and quasi-judicial cases, so like zoning change requests or variance requests or what have you. And you have plats. And a lot of planning programs don't teach you about plats. I'll talk about plats in a minute. But for the land use cases, a lot of what you might learn in a planning capstone class will talk about different land use stuff. And you have a bunch of Supreme Court cases to learn about land use law, but most of them barely apply because all you're doing is applying the ordinance that's in front of you, right? And say if a person comes in and they want to change a piece of property that they own from one zoning to another, you have to have some sort of analytical mindset, and this is probably where the planning knowledge comes in, to say, okay, your property is residential, you want it to turn it into commercial. Everything around you is residential. They're not going to allow commercial inside residential because Euclidean use segregation. You can't have anything like that. So you have to advise them that they'd be wasting their money in a not so rude way. Or if they're trying to do something that is more feasible, explain to them the pros and cons, the length of the process. A lot of your job in current planning is just explaining government processes, like how does the legislative process work? And then once they've committed to it, they put in their application, they pay their application fee, Now you begin the report writing. You create a staff report. And the staff report is the deliverable product for a land use case. And pretty much everywhere you go, there are going to be templates where you just plug and chug, just change the words to fit the land use case. And there's very little real analysis, very little like data driven stuff. And if there is, it's like non-consequential bullcrap most places. And because it is a very administrative job, and because you're constantly dealing with the public, and it is very customer driven, in these sections you treat the public not as the public citizens but as customers. Because of that, you're dealing with a lot of the politics of the money cycle in an area. You do meet all the rich, important people. You meet all the developers, the lawyers, all of those folks wherever you're working. You shake hands. You network really well. But you learn that if a developer that wants to build a multi-million-dollar project, a big subdivision of houses, he's going to get invited into whatever office to have an hour conversation with this manager, that manager, this department head. A random person comes off the street and they just want to talk about their fence. They're talking to you. So you definitely see that. So if you're the type of person who has certain ideals about public service, not really going to happen in planning, at least in current planning. And the other side of that is plats. Plats are the legal subdivision of land in document form. So before land is developed upon, built upon, it has to be legally recorded, subdivided in a plat. And it's a legal document. It's this whole thing. Usually that's reserved for people who've been working in planning for a few years. So you probably won't touch plats in most jobs if you're just getting out of school, which is good, because goddamn, plats will fuck you up. Not because it's hard. It's just like if you miss like one thing in the ordinance, like you're going down the checklist, you miss one thing, you're fucked. You are responsible for a lot of money. So in that aspect, current planning sees way more turnover than the other parts of planning. When you apply for a planning job coming out of school, most likely it's going to be in current planning, and you're not going to be doing real planning work. You're going to be doing the administrative work of just preparing land use cases and all that. And you, depending on the municipality, you will present to whatever board, and that feels cool and exciting at first, but then you realize they're just rich assholes. And if you're like me, you just don't care about rich assholes. But and that really depends on management and their ego. You could work for a big city and you still, as a planner one, you still present your cases, or you could work for a small town and whoever else, the manager might think that he needs to present the cases. So it's not based off the size of the city. It's really just management, like anything else. So most likely you will be working in a small town at first, say if you're straight out of college, especially if you don't have a master's degree. The only work you're going to find is in a small town. So if you're willing to move across the country to any small town, you will get a job immediately. You will probably get a job immediately in some podunk small town doing current planning. You will have job security. You won't make that much money. Most likely you'll make between $35,000 to $40,000, $35,000 to $45,000 your first job out of school, working for some small town doing planning work. If you envision yourself working in a bigger city. Get a master's or get a few years of experience. Be willing to move. If you're willing to move, you get a job in this field anywhere in the country. Now, my real advice is, if you want to, affect the built environment, like you really want to make the world a better place in big projects, government's not where to do it. Government is not where to do it. Say in comprehensive planning, you just give guideposts. If a planner is worth his salt in the report and he can come up with reasons not to follow the comprehensive plan, they won't follow the comprehensive plan. If a wealthy land developer wants to build this giant thing and it doesn't go with the comprehensive plan, they're not going to go with the comprehensive plan. They're just guideposts. They're not law. They're not mandatory. If you think that you can do anything in current planning, you won't. The reality is, only planning firms or architecture firms, the people who actually design buildings or design urban spaces, get to really be the planners. Planning in reality happens in the private sector. And to that end, I would say, if you want a job in the private sector, don't get a degree in planning. Get a degree in landscape architecture. Get an architecture degree. And the big things with those is that you learn hard skills like AutoCAD and all the other things that are way more marketable. Planning degree, it's really hard to get a job in the private sector solely with a planning background. It's much easier to get a job in the private sector if you have a background in architecture or landscape architecture. You will get a job much quicker, and you'll be able to affect the built environment much quicker. If you already have a planning degree and you're going for your master's, that's smart. You need a master's degree. I cannot emphasize that enough. You need a master's degree. If you plan on staying in government, get an MPA. It'll serve you better. If you want to do transportation planning, just get a transportation engineering degree, civil engineering degree. Same deal. You will be able to find a job in the private sector so much quicker, with very little resistance. There are a bajillion transportation engineer jobs open, and they're the ones that get to design and make the cool transportation stuff, not transportation planners in government. All they do is handle the pass-through of money. If you really like GIS, you want to be a GIS planner. You want to crunch numbers, do cool data analysis and machine learning stuff. Get a rock solid GIS degree, or even better, get a computer science degree. Get a degree in coding, because a planning degree isn't going to do you shit. That's the hard truth. If you want to do planning stuff, private sector is the place to do it. If you want to go into the private sector, it's much easier with different degrees, with hard skills, because planning doesn't have any hard skills, and you find that out pretty quickly. The best skill you get as a planner is being able to talk to people. You can talk to people all day, but people won't necessarily hire you in the real world for being able to talk to people. This has been a downer video, but I wish someone had made something like this 10 years ago whenever I decided to get into this field. If anybody watches this and they find it helpful, awesome. I'm really glad it helped somebody. If you have any questions about anything planning related, please feel free, comment, message me, whatever. I can answer questions. All right.